Bloomberg Audio Studios.
Podcasts, radio, news.
Emmanuel Macron promised revolution when he was running to be France's president for the first time in 2017. Revolution was also the title of Macron's memoir, and in that book, and on the campaign trail, Macron made the case for big structural reforms for France. Since then, he's cut red tape, trimmed taxes, and made it easier for French companies to fire workers. Last year, Macron successfully pushed through Parliament a controversial increase to the retirement age in France from 62 to 64. Well, making changes like that has not been easy. But despite domestic pushback, Macron has not stopped there. He's now set his sights beyond France's borders. He's talking about the need to reform Europe as a whole. Lionel Laurent is a Paris-based columnist for Bloomberg Opinion. He says, as ever, the devil is in the details.
France has all of the assets, I would say, to really shine in this new geopolitical world as a European leader. The problem is always just the actual reality, the final step it takes to actually deliver.
One step Macron is taking is to encourage foreign investment through an annual event he holds called Choose France.
So this has been going on since he really took over as president, and his pitch has always been a kind of investment banker's pitch. It's basically saying that France is a country that's open for business and that's doing the work of reforming itself.
And a lot of companies have been choosing France. The country has become one of the top destinations for foreign investment in Europe. On Monday, against the backdrop of Versailles, Macron made his case to a group of executives and to Bloomberg's editor-in-chief, John Micklethwait, that his plan will make Europe into a financial powerhouse that could rival China and the United States.
My point is just to say, we delivered, we do deliver, and we will deliver.
Today on the show, President Emmanuel Macron's revolution, his bold vision to transform Europe's economy, and his urgent warning about what could happen if world leaders don't heed his call. I'm David Gura, and this is The Big Take from Bloomberg News. Bloomberg's editor-in-chief, John Micklethwait, first met Emmanuel Macron years ago, long before he became France's youngest president.
I've known him for a long time, for about 20 years, I think. And he has always been someone who has wanted to change the way that business, like a global business community, feels about France, but also change the way that France feels about global business.
I caught up with John by phone right after his interview with Macron on Monday, and he told me, given their long history, he's fascinated by the evolution of Macron's goals.
He feels as if his real mission now is to try and change Europe as much as change France.
John sat down with Macron on the sidelines of that summit with business leaders. And this year, Macron announced pledges of a record 15 billion euros of new investment from some heavy hitters, including Microsoft. John told me that setting was designed to send a message.
I remember telling French friends that I was seeing him at Versailles, and they said, come on, really? And the truth is, Versailles tends to be an image, for rather obvious reasons. He doesn't broadcast at home very much. But Versailles works a treat when you're bringing in foreign bankers and things like that. So that tends to be the sort of reason why it was there. Yes, he was standing in the footsteps of Napoleon Bonaparte to some extent.
But foreign investment in France was not the only thing Micklethwait asked Macron about. As you'll hear, they went much deeper, covering everything from the world's richest man, hint, it's not Elon Musk, to the future of Europe.
President Macron, thank you for talking to Bloomberg. We're here at your annual Choose France conference for foreign investors. And as long as I've known you, you have always wanted to prepare France to like business more, but also business to like France more. And you look and you see what is happening here. You have had many successes. You are about to trumpet 15 billion euros of investment in France. But you also know France has problems. The economy is not growing that much. The economy since you came in has grown roughly half as fast as America. You still have a state that takes up 57% of GDP. And you have all that red tape, which your government says it wants to get rid of, that is around 3% of GDP. So how do you persuade people to choose France against that?
We delivered a lot of reform. Since the very beginning, 2017, tax cuts, flat tax on capital gains. We decreased from 33.3 to 25% corporate taxes. We made a lot of reforms on labor law. And after COVID, during the past 2 years, we delivered, we do deliver, and we will deliver. So it's a permanent work. But I see where we come from and where we want to go. France was lagging behind, clearly in Europe, because of too much bureaucracy, a strong system, a lot of strengths, but lack of competitiveness. I think we bridge. I see that we clearly bridge the gap with the others, and now we are frontrunners in Europe.
President Macron's planned reforms don't stop at labor and taxes. He also sees investment as key to supporting innovation and business growth in France. That would likely involve banking reform. But there, too, Macron is facing a slew of regulations, not just in his own country, but in the EU as well. Something he and John also discussed.
I mean, based on public reports and figures, we need 1 trillion more in terms of budget, in terms of spending. And in parallel, we have to make the capital market union a reality, which is not yet the case.
Can I come on the capital market union? Because you have here an example. You have BNP.
Yeah.
Now probably Europe's and definitely the Eurozone's most successful bank, worth $80 billion. But you are entertaining these people like JP Morgan and so on. JP Morgan is worth $550 billion. It's 9 times as big. Bank of America, 4 times as big. And the reason why is BNP Paribas cannot expand throughout the European Union and take over other banks.
This is very true. We have several issues.
You would like to see BNP take over one of these, take over a German bank or an Italian one.
We do need a consolidation, but we do need as well an actual domestic market as Europeans, which is not the case. We have to deal with 27 regulations. Our view is that now we want to have a single system of resolution, a single supervision, and a much more integrated capital market union.
But would you be happy with, say, Spain's Santander coming and buying Societe Generale as part of that?
It's part of the market, but dealing as Europeans means that you need consolidation as Europeans.
So it could be cross-border mergers in both directions.
Mergers in both directions, unlike in the U.S., where the banking industry has been steadily consolidating for years and where banks are now some of the biggest companies in the world. In Europe, there are steep barriers that make it difficult for banks from one country to acquire banks from another. That's meant real limits on how much European banks can grow. Macron has spoken out against this. Macron told John bigger banks, a more efficient system of lending, and increased comfort around taking financial risks are key to economic growth in France and in all of Europe if they want to start competing with countries like the US and China.
In parallel with this capital market union and this simplification, having an actual single market, we clearly need the same level playing field as the US. Otherwise, this is a killer for risk-taking, because these regulations just prevent our banks, from investing in equity, which is exactly what we need. And if you take the key driver of this difference between the US and Europe, the key driver is the fact that the US economy innovated and invested much more in equity and innovation than the European economy. And we do need this new business model for the Europeans, more innovation, more investment, single market and capital market union.
But as much as Macron has pushed for reform and innovation, it's the more traditional French companies that have thrived under his presidency, which is something else John brought up with Macron.
I looked, and nobody has done better under the Macron presidency than Bernard Arnault. His wealth has increased by 170 billion euros, and he is now the richest man in the world, probably the first Frenchman to have that honour since Napoleon. And I think we can both say bravo to Mr. Arnault. He's done it in a more peaceful way. But it's interesting. You look at the people who've, right at the very top of the wealthiest people in France, they're mostly either heirs or in fashion or both. And I wonder whether that is the kind of France you talked about creating. You always talk about technology, but the people who've done really well are these old-style businesses.
You're right. I don't think it's an old style of business. But it's a business where we have competitive advantage, luxury, fashion, and so on, because France is one of the great places. And Bernard Arnault consolidated this market very early. He was one of the front runners in this industry. And I think it is very good, and this is a chance for us, because first, we speak about a lot of jobs which are located in France, because a lot of these jobs are impossible to be relocated elsewhere. When you speak about alcohol, when you speak about cognac, armagnac, champagne, fashion, and making a lot of this stuff, it's added value. It's low qualified and very qualified jobs. And thanks to the fact that he is listed in France, we consolidate a lot of value and value creation as well. And this is why, thanks to Total, LVMH, BNP, and so on, we are the second largest place of the world to list your company.
So that's President Macron's pitch to global businesses. After the break, I asked John if that will be enough to convince more foreign investors to pour their money into the country, and what that could mean for the future of Macron's presidency and the future of Europe. We just heard Emmanuel Macron's pitch to chief executives: fewer regulations for businesses and for banks, letting companies grow bigger, take more risks. I asked Bloomberg editor-in-chief John Micklethwait to put it in a broader context. As a candidate, John, he called for a revolution. What was that revolution then, and how much has it evolved or changed to now? So you talk about the vision that he has for Europe. How much is that part and parcel of what he set out on the campaign trail in 2017?
I think the vision when he first came in was much more about France. It was about that he wanted to invent a kind of new kind of France, one which felt more comfortable with capitalism. He wanted to merge that with social democracy in a way a little bit like Tony Blair. If you said Thatcher, he would run a mile, but there was a little bit of that as well. And, he will point in. He reduced taxes. He did all these things. He has made, we now have a Frenchman as the world's richest person in Bernard Arnault. We have many other things of Paris doing quite well. Paris has gained a bit against London, although I think that's probably, shouldn't exaggerate that too much. But it's done pretty well. But increasingly, I think Macron is driven by a realization that not much is going to happen in France without change in Europe as well.
That's on the economic playing field, but the sort of geopolitical one as well. And we've certainly seen him talking more about and playing the role of a diplomat in the context of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. How does he see himself as both an economic and political statesman today?
He sees it very much as intertwined. At one time I asked him whether Europe's sclerotic economy was a bigger danger than Putin, and he ducked that one. But I think he does see it together. He thinks his vision of Europe is a place that has tried to play by the rules and is now being left behind by China and by America, neither of whom he thinks play by the rules. And so Europe has to kind of come together, and that means being much tougher when it's doing kind of trading deals with both, especially China, but also America. And at the same token, it needs to reform itself within the wall that he wants to create around Europe. So he wants to see more kind of competition. He also wants to see kind of more champions emerging. And the particular one we talked about here was banking, although we also talked about energy and luxury goods as well.
As we mentioned, one of the big headlines from John's interview with Macron was the president's willingness to entertain the idea that a French bank, in this instance Société Générale, could be taken over by a non-French owner. The example John used was the Spanish bank Santander. That will certainly raise eyebrows, but it's emblematic of what Macron sees as necessary to reform Europe's whole economy. After the interview, I asked John how he thought that was landing. Could you get a sense of how resonant that message is with the executives who he's brought to France for this conference?
I think it does resonate a little. Some business people will like some part of it, some people will like others. You next have all the allies, people, especially in Germany, would say, well, yeah, that's fairly typical of Emmanuel Macron. He'll go and make big speeches about the need for competition in Europe and the need for national champions. But on the whole, he wants to have French ones rather than other ones when in practice, his government vetoed the merger of supermarkets on the grounds of national security. So, he's got a little form in that. On his side, you can say that saying, fine, somebody could take over Société Générale is a sign that he's moved on that.
But John told me that something raising alarm bells were the president's proposals to put up more trade barriers in order to combat what he sees as unfair practices implemented by the U.S. and China.
I mean, just to use the example of France's richest man and the biggest company in France, LVMH. That is just like Kering, just like L'Oreal, just like all these different Hermes, all these other big French fashion and luxury goods houses. They do very well out of globalization. And what I think they're worried about is if Europe puts up a barrier saying, we don't want China's electric cars, well, maybe China says, well, we don't want your handbags or your cognac either, or at least we want to apply tariffs to them. And so there are some parts of the French economy, indeed the European economy, who would feel sort of threatened by this, I think.
But Macron's revolutionary spirit has been met with frequent protests, political reality, and a deep slide in his approval ratings. How is this message playing with French people beyond the gates at Versailles? We see President Macron's poll ratings. We see sort of the political terrain shifting in France. How much is he banking on this potential success, getting more foreign investment, as boosting his party and his political prospect?
That's a very good question. As you point out, is the kind of French public. At the moment, if we believe the polls, the person most likely to follow Macron, or there will be others, no doubt, but Marine Le Pen is sitting there at the moment as the most likely, albeit just by plurality. And the Le Pens have always been beaten before in the last round. But I think that shows a considerable amount of discontent in the wider sort of French universe. And that poses, I think, a couple of problems for Macron in terms of his legacy. The first is, what happens if he becomes more famous for what he was in being elected, and perhaps in the same way as Barack Obama, and after him everything comes to pieces because just as Barack Obama was followed by Donald Trump, then he might be followed by Le Pen.
For more of our interview with Emmanuel Macron, read The Big Take on the Bloomberg Terminal and at Bloomberg.com. Now, before we go, I have some exciting news. We at The Big Take have a new show launching tomorrow, Big Take Asia. My co-host Sarah Holder is here with me in the studio. Hey, Sarah.
Hey, David. This is a big moment for our whole team. One of my favorite things about working at Bloomberg is that we have journalists all around the world.
In, I think, more than 100 bureaus last time I checked.
And they're all working to bring you coverage with a truly global perspective. We've heard illuminating episodes from countries across Asia here on The Big Take in the past few months.
And now we're going to have them every week. Wan Ha will join us as host. She's based in Hong Kong and has been covering the region for nearly 15 years. Every Tuesday, she's going to take listeners on a deep dive into some of the world's most dynamic economies.
And the markets, tycoons, and businesses that drive the ever-shifting region.
The first episode is out tomorrow. You can find Big Take Asia wherever you listen to podcasts. This is The Big Take from Bloomberg News. I'm David Gura. This episode was produced and mixed by Alex Segura. It was edited by Stacey Vanek Smith and Ben Sills. It was fact-checked by Adriana Tapia. Our senior producers are Naomi Shavin and Kim Gittleson. Our senior editor is Elizabeth Ponso. Nicole Beamsterboer is our executive producer. Sage Bauman is our head of podcasts. Thanks for listening. Please follow and review The Big Take wherever you get your podcasts. It helps new listeners find the show. We'll be back tomorrow.